In 2002, due to unprecedentedly high ratings from a certain special, Nickelodeon produced a spin-off series to Rugrats that ended up getting unfortunate backlash. One that was supposed to appeal to a new batch of viewers. This was none other than All Grown Up. It ran for 55 episodes before being quietly canceled in 2005. The show was really trying to be ambitious for aging up their babies by a decade and sending them off to their new adventurous lives, but their target demographic gave it 2 thumbs down. Perhaps this was because this concept had been done by being run into the ground by other networks at the time, or that this simply wasn't appropriate to do for a cartoon like this. Well, why was this? I, in fact, have 4 reasons as to why. Number 4, the early character designs. When the show started in 2002, the characters and the environments had to be given a drastic change in appearance. The clothes in the special made them look just like they would be a decade or older, but when it came to the official series, the colors on the clothes and the general animation looked oddly flat. So it was probably less than appealing to those viewers. They commonly wore the same clothes in every episode, which is ubiquitous for cartoons, but just resigned badly with the environment of the show. Season 2, however, was given an animation bump with more vibrant clothes and designs for the kids, with more changes of the clothes in each episode to make the story feel more engaged with the change. But a good chunk of the fan base had left by that point due to either disinterest or negative response to the premise. This may be linked to reason number 3, poor advertising. For those who watch these Nick videos, you probably already know why this probably is, but I'll explain anyway. The show really was not promoted as heavily as SpongeBob or Fairly OddParents, so it was sadly overshadowed by those shows for not being in the ideal ratings, which occurred around the midpoint of season 2. Most of the ads that did appear were exaggerated and not quite as appealing as the other shows. It was as if the advertiser had so little faith in the show as ads became increasingly rare to the point where episodes ended up being shelved. In fact, they didn't even finish airing the 4th season properly before unceremoniously broadcasting it at 6:30 a.m. in November 2007, over 2 years after these episodes completed production. It did end up rerunning until the start of 2013, but that was still at the crack of dawn, so the damage was clearly done. Reason number 2, plot-derived stories. Many of these stories had been done by sitcoms, let alone teen shows, to hell and back. The most particularly interesting is All Grown Up's sister show, As Told by Ginger, which was more directly aimed at teenagers and as it was mainly an all-teenage cast. The show had more dark, realistic, and practical storylines for its viewers, and despite the crude looks of the characters, they took care of their struggles properly. All Grown Up, meanwhile, felt like it was grabbing the stuff while literally directly replacing it with their own characters while barely changing the dialogue and scenarios with quirky comedy and bait and switches. It was like they wanted All Grown Up to casually subvert Ginger's show, but they knew they had to give it some distinction. Sadly, the reason that all this happened leads us to the number 1 reason that All Grown Up was turned down by audiences. And that is, the characters don't act like their age nor like their old selves. These characters in the original show were 1 to 3 years old, meaning that when All Grown Up comes around, they would be about a decade older. Thus, they would be dealing with things that 11 to 13-year-olds should be facing. Although Klasky Chupo really wanted to expand upon world building for these new variations of their characters, so instead of just dealing with school and family, they end up touching on more teenage-oriented scenarios like romance, physical changes, and even addiction, although not the addiction that you're thinking of. All this stuff was more suitably tackled in As Told by Ginger. I'm not saying that they had to avoid these topics, but they should not have carried them so early into the show's run. It also doesn't help that the character designs make them seem older than they actually are, with the probable exceptions of Susie and Dill. So some casual viewers incorrectly presumed that everyone was indeed at least 13 years of age. This was kind of common for other preteen shows at the time, but All Grown Up's case was probably the most egregious. Amidst it all, most of the characters' dialogues drive too far away from their old personalities and too far into generic teenagers. They do occasionally reference the old show's lore, but they subvert this by staying cliched situational dialogue of those shows from the late 90s and perhaps even the early 90s. They could feel like older, disassociated versions of themselves that cannot find their own former charisma, so it was a lot harder for some people to relate to them, which really was unfortunate. Now, All Grown Up has gained a little cult following thanks to YouTube clips and Paramount Plus, as well as the somewhat infamous Rugrats reboot of 2021. And they are starting to see how All Grown Up actually has had some sense of success. Fans like myself feel that it gave some characters more dynamics and story arcs, especially Dill. We wanted to see the new world that they'd be living in. They had some good lore from the OG Rugrats, Reptar for example. The animation had good stylization as well, especially midway through the show's run with the shading, as well as how all the clothes tried to be different every episode. They even therefore tried to give these characters new journeys and especially resolutions. In fact, there was one episode that was almost the finale, RV Having Fun Yet, wherein they go on a road trip for Susie's Macy's Day Parade, but they end up being overdosed by their mothers, and then they try to abandon them only for them to lose the RV, but manage to independently go so far without them and realize how much their moms ultimately helped them. I say almost finale because this was the last episode to be aired at a consistent practical time slot before being axed, and thus it's certainly possible that fans believed it was indeed the final episode of the show. However, we got one final season after that, which sucked. It obliterated the faith that season 3 and 4 were giving us with the character growth, relatability, and even creativity. Instead, traded it for filler episodes and episodes that contradict the characters' motives, dare I say, flanderizing them. Tommy got it the worst for being uncharacteristically impulsive and even insensitive, which is very cruelly ironic considering how much he helped them in the original show. So instead of a reboot for All Grown Up, much less a 6th season, I believe people like myself want a significantly improved 5th season to have helped the show try to stay above water. Nevertheless, people are seeing how great of a cartoon that All Grown Up tried to be in its earlier episodes, and are preferring it to the chaos that is the Rugrats reboot, because it mostly contradicts what made the original Rugrats special, 2020 setting aside, even more so than All Grown Up accidentally did. All Grown Up has merits, so despite the flaws, I would like you to watch it because you'll find some good charm that you would not expect from a lowbrow 2000s tune. You may have known that a while ago I made a video essay on how All Grown Up failed as an older Rugrats follow-up. However, I never clearly elaborate as to why Season 5 is so awful. In short, Season 5 takes the character growth and faith that we were all looking forward to seeing and then sends it into the dumpster fire. It is so horrendous to me because it shows how complacent and incompetent the writing team and even the animators were becoming. I hate this season even more than Fairly Odd Parents Season 10 because at least those cartoons are mostly 11 minutes long and don't try to consistently moralize the viewer. I can totally see why Nick withheld this final season for 2 years and omitted it from Nick Rewind as well as their social media posts when they bring up the spin-off. So, let's run down each episode from least frustrating to most and how it would improve each of them. Get ready, it's going to be a lot. Number 1, Trading Places. Instead of Kimmy getting angry at everyone over her dad's divorce and then everyone failing to make her feel better by recreating her room as a surprise, have her go to a therapy session with other children dealing with divorce so that they can discuss their experience and issues with it, and then it can show how sometimes divorce is for the better. It didn't make any sense for Pangborn to not consider counseling when he found that angry poem of hers, but otherwise we can learn that these issues are not meant to be fixed by us, but there is still a semblance of love within the family. And although I like Angelica's character development by willfully spending time with Kimmy when her room was being redecorated, they should have spent a little bit less time on that with its awkward stalling and give us a bit more time to understand Hiro's background. Although I do believe that he and Kira divorced due to the travel issues between Japan and France for the Reptar Land job. Number 2, Bad Blood. In the final produced episode, I don't really care for the alien autopsy storyline fact of the whole grade coming to see the tape and Dill lying about that. Just get rid of that plot point. Just focus on the 2 boys having fun with their very own alien movie. The other friends did not really add anything too funny in this episode aside from Phil enjoying the hash. And then seeing how dichotomous their grandfather's relationships are, and then use flashbacks of the brothers' previous fights to draw solutions and compromises between the two. And then they all have a good time watching the movie, and then the bigger plot twist comes from an alien jump scare right out of their TV as they wonder if they do exist. We didn't need a random lore drop of Tommy's anxiety rash or that gross visual of the grandfather's flashing. It was like they knew they weren't returning after this season, so they actively made it as obscene as possible, although the message that grudges aren't worth anything is still present in the official version. Number 3, TP plus KF. This is the official Halloween episode, but it barely matters for the story, so I would omit that along with the fact that this occurs when Tommy is in fact dating Rachel. Anyways, rather than Kimmy selfishly keeping quiet that she was the one who made the initials years back, I would have preferred her to take the blame to protect Tommy and Chucky's friendship, knowing how important they are for each other. But actually, after conferring with Kimmy about how close they seem after all this time, with a flashback from infancy to the point of our big twist, Tommy remembers that he was indeed the one who made the heart all that time ago, and thus confesses to Chucky, who was initially irritated. But after a few seconds, he calms down and understands Kimmy and Tommy's connection, and just expresses how he was being overprotective and unnecessarily reactive over this issue that doesn't matter anymore. But should he indeed find love in Kimmy, he will accept that because that's what a good friend like him should be doing. There can still be conflict in this episode, but it needs to be realistic and engaging. Also, they did not have to make Chucky seem so desperate to the point where it does a bait and switch on him talking to Elaborate only to in fact be in his mind. Oh my god. I know it's a cartoon, but really? Number 4, superhero worship. A few things that stood out to me as weak points was the lesson of forget your problems by helping other people with their own was completely given before Chucky actually learned it. I would have rather had his stepmother come in the night that he's mildly wallowing Armadillo Dave and then comfort him as he goes to sleep, where he has a dream that shows, instead of tells, a flashback of how Stu helped Chaz get Kira and Kimmy to begin with, which would make Chucky's turnaround of new bravery feel much more on his own volition to save Tommy and his friends from the vicious giant rat. Speaking of which, I did not care for Kimmy's overprotection for it. Although one has to think that this is due to the seeming death of Fifi, and I would have rather had Dill be the one to take control of it before the rat finally snaps at him, which is more in line with his quirkiness rather than having to go with the obvious no one can take that rat. I mean, Dill's obsessed with all kinds of animals. Maybe it has to do with Nigel Thornberry. The characters should have immediately seen how Chucky relates to Dave due to their oddities and unconfidence. Yet they actively try to show that he'll be better off as a functioning being than Harold, the franchise's worst character in my opinion, where, incidentally, he's here as his only appearance without Angelica. This episode also feels cruelly meta by the analogy of Chucky being a fan of Armadillo Dave, like the All Grown Up show, and try and track down the comic creator akin to All Grown Up's own creators to continue the story, even though it's over and he must deal with it. It is sadly another sign of disgruntled writing and smugness that shouldn't have a place here. Okay, halfway point. Brothers Grimm. Instead of Dee Dee actively denying everyone TV against their will, have it be a neighborhood power outage where there's no need to blame anyone, and thus they instead make up their own games and have fun flashback, which could be recreations of iconic Rugrats episodes. Including Angelica and Susie would be a smart point as well, because I feel like they could have been really key to make this episode fun for the older viewers too. This also diminishes the depiction of kids willfully endangering themselves to make their parents overturn their punishment. Like, what kind of crude message is that? You act as bad as you want, you put yourself in danger, and then your parents give you what they prohibit you as a reward? Like, what kind of message is that for kids? Although, they turned down watching the TV anyway in the official version, but they should have been something like Stu fixing their TV, but then they insist the parents join in on their flashbacks instead. They can also keep that running gag of Dee Dee stress knitting, but change the Christmas sweaters for the boys to Hanukkah ones. Like, that Jewish plot point is a key lore point for the franchise, yet they had forgotten it there. They admittedly redeemed this a little bit with Spike in a sweater, but then they completely overshot it by covering the whole house and the knit stuff. So make the denial TV just an accident rather than a punishment to make a more relatable story. Number 6. Susie Goes Bad light. What I love about Susie is that she is the antithesis of the common African-American stereotypical girl as seen in media. And yes, people have discussed this issue in other Nick shows. Susie here, however, pulls a 180 and decides that she's tired of being a goody two-shoes, thanks to mockery from her friends. Angelica's methods to stop here are completely contrived due to Lillian and Kimmy's expository reasons not to stop Susie themselves. They were just far from needing, like, them being too nauseous and too scared, respectively. Ugh, no thank you. So many expository jokes made by Susie were unnecessary on their own, too. Like how she's accidentally perfect, so much so that she'd become president of the United States. I won't make a further comment on that. What I will want instead is for Susie to join other girls in a prank out of coercion, and then Angelica, upon realizing how dangerous the prank is, willfully tries to stop Susie, but all the girls get caught, and thus Susie will accept the fact that she isn't perfect anymore, and sometimes she has to live with mistakes like this. And Angelica admits that she'll still be her best friend, rather than taking the blame for stealing the telephone wire sneakers in a completely contrived fashion. As for the B-plot, instead of Phil mocking everyone for their cooking style and then underwhelmingly grossing out the cooking community with his own unhygienic habits, have him realize this in advance and actively restrain from his flaws, and thus he will have grown up from his childish habits. Also, include Dylan in this one to enjoy his own food, and then maybe they end up forming a cool unit for school lunch, or at the very least, the Jabba Lava, and then Tommy and Chucky will accept his new stance. As Told by Ginger did a similar plotline to this in the episode Fast Reputation with Carl and Hootsie, and they did it way better, and the characters are supposed to be younger than them here. They really need to figure out who this demographic really is. In fact, that's relevant to the next episode that we're discussing. What's love got to do with it? If we were looking at the badness of episodes simply in demographically inappropriate content, this one certainly takes the cake. Like Angelica falling for a substitute teacher twice her age, being depicted in the right? How on earth was this approved? Remove the love aspect, instead make a more demanding, strict substitute where Angelica realizes that she has to make genuine arguments to them, and maybe add a scene where she gets in a bit of trouble realizing that she cannot win all the time, and then she could make her amends with Harold more legitimate, even if I don't really approve of their relationship. Like, was this episode trying to make me feel bad for him because he was actively jealous of Mr. Fisk? And what's more convoluting to me is how they depicted Angelica as 4 different characters, from the alpha bitch to the dumb blonde to the nerd to the straight woman, if you can even call it that. Is this supposed to be a Legally Blonde knockoff? Ugh. Just keep her as Jerk with a heart of gold so that we can indeed root for her and make Susie more genuinely supportive rather than once again regressing to the commonplace black girl caricature. Also, the subplot deals with Chucky having gymnophobia. You should probably know what that is if you watched Arrested Development. Just skip this subplot. Actually, replace it with them focusing on trying to win a tennis game coming up, and Chucky confidently helps Phil and Tommy win, and maybe even throw Dill in with a new funny mascot costume for good measure. Okay, final 3 episodes. Petition this. This is like Finsterella, with all the bad qualities done even more cruelly. While Angelica barely knew better to belittle Kira and Kimmy towards Chucky in their first official episode, this time she was deliberately exploiting other people's need for cell phones to help with her own, and thus sabotage their Chucky and Kimmy's parents' 10th anniversary for their wedding out of pure cruelty. And then it just ends with both of them getting cell phones despite the establishment of Kimmy's no cell phone zone. This is hypocrisy at its stupidest. I mean, I know this was 2005, so some schools had to have pre-established no cell phone rules for their days, but this is not timeless in the slightest, therefore. How would I all change this? Well, Chucky sends Tommy his home movies, and he dumbly sends them all, including false recreations of the episodes in the official version. So maybe here, they, along with Kimmy, find some secret footage that seemingly showed a big conflict, like some woman who Chaz might have been cheating with, and they want to do the best at the party to make sure that it never happens, only for it to be a simple misunderstanding, and that they watch another movie to reveal that it was only a pen pal, and that Kira and him are not mad because they were looking out for them. And all is well until she suddenly shows up at the party, causing hilarious awkwardness. Incidentally, this was the final episode to feature all 8 characters, so this really stunk for viewers like me. I feel like each person should play a key part in trying to keep the Finsters glued together, and make a quirky yet heartwarming anniversary episode to the second movie. Second to last episode to talk about, Golden Boy. All that I can really say about this one is that it takes everything that makes the Rugrats movie fantastic and then disputes its character growth to actively anger us. And that's kind of an understatement. This was also the broadcast finale in the United States, which left so much to be desired. From endangering their grandfather to the subplot of the fathers fighting over a card, it was just cruel and boring respectively. Just watch the first movie instead because it deals with the conflicts and favoritism and responsibility there as best as it can, and has more appropriate darkness if we really want drama. Now, we've talked about cruelty, character derailment, and inappropriate content. What if there's an episode that combines all 3 of them and then some? Well, look no further to the appropriately titled episode, All Broke Up. Now, it makes sense for Tommy not to be sad about the breakup with Rachel considering how early in his life he is, not to mention that it's because she's moving away. Nothing out of his control, it was because of her dad's new job. But personally, his friends are dicks for budging into the situation, let alone continuing doing so when Tommy politely dismisses them several times. This does not excuse his eventual manipulation and lies towards his friends and even his teachers, but even if his friends were trying to empathize with Tommy, this interaction could have made him regress if he's not ready to express his emotions properly. He set boundaries with his friends who willfully ignored them, and then he childishly took advantage of their kindness when he was fed up. Yep. I legitimately do not want to defend Tommy due to how immaturely and irrationally he responded, but as sensitive as the topic was, it was not his friend's business to be part of, yet they butted in anyways. It all falls apart when he meets a girl and invites her to a party, and then his friends try to surprise him with Rachel coming over, but then everyone is pissed at him for manipulating them, and sure enough, he emotionally relapses, and Chucky only ingenuinely consoles him over the movie that Tommy saw with Rachel on their last date. Meanwhile, Dill's motive is also dumb, if he's just using his interest to make his own business. At this point, Dill's found his own happiness, not caring about the approval of other useless people. So thanks to Charlotte's desperation from unemployment, she's exploiting Dill into commercializing the game that she was otherwise dismissive of, and trying to make him believe that by making this game the next big thing, they'll finally be seen as worth something into others. Like, why? Why is this happening? Dill should have turned it down on the spot because he can't just please people despite his neurodivergence. He will just relate to other people and they can gradually share their own quirks and interests. He should have seen Charlotte's vicarious actions towards success a long time coming. Anyhow, this episode could have worked out a lot better if the night that Rachel and Tommy decide to split up, his friends immediately accept to leave him alone, and then he has a fantasy of Rachel meeting another boy like him, only better, and then he combines into his parents about the situation, especially Devi, given how close she is with Rachel, instead of his brother, and the two reassure him that since he's still young, he'll find someone more compatible, and maybe they could set them up for one last meeting before they mutually decide to see each other off and move on with their lives, knowing that they weren't perfect together, but there are more people to find later on. And then he rejoins his friends, who meanwhile have been contemplating about how they should go about when they hit relationships and even recall their past mistakes. And then they meet up for a meal or a game, and he says that things will look better, but he wants to spend some time with you guys for a bit. And thus things end off on a appropriately high note, which is much more compelling, fun, and a relatable story. In fact, maybe Dill could have found some girl with similar problems and they should not be dating, but just be very close friends, because Dill is not really romantically interested in people. So, with that being said, why would he have given Tommy the quote-unquote advice to begin with in the official version? And if they really had to be cruel, at the very least make the girls walk away without saying a word to Tommy, and then later have the friends call him out for his big flaws that he chose instead of acting anything to do with it, kind of like the end of Clerks, but not a ripoff. Wasted potential would be a far too kind statement on this disaster. As insulting and dumb as this season is, this wasn't the only batch of 10 episodes that Nick withheld. They did the same thing for Season 3B of As Told by Ginger, but for all the cruelty, it was realistic to some extent, and actually gave some morality with its drama, not to mention that these characters were indeed high schoolers, which made more sense of this. Even the most controversial episode, Wicked Game, deals with the situation more realistically and compellingly. Check out that show instead if you really want some darkness emotionally. I must say though, as much as I hate All Grown Up's final season, I don't hate the whole show. There is some odd charms in seasons 2 through 4 because there's a lot of humor that I grew up on, being a 2000s kid myself. I want to see how they changed as people, and they improved characters like Kimmy and Dill, so they wanted to capitalize on some of the flaws that they could fix. I do believe they've grown up to be functioning adults, but to be honest, I'd rather watch the reboot despite how odd the animation of that is, because it's more genuine and less alienating and even more fun usually. Anyone can write stories about teenagers, but nobody can write stories about infants like this crew can. Thanks for watching, guys. Or rather listening, because I used a bunch of pictures. Subscribe, like, and comment.